The golden cage, the morning light filtered through the floor-to-ceiling windows of the Ashford penthouse, casting geometric shadows across the imported Italian marble floors. Victoria Ashford stood at the window, one hand resting on her swollen belly, the other holding a cup of herbal tea that had long since gone cold. From 43 stories up, the city looked like a circuit board, all gleaming lines and orderly chaos. Beautiful but distant, untouchable. Much like her life had become, she was 8 months pregnant, her body transformed into something she barely recognized. The pregnancy had not been easy. Gestational diabetes, high blood pressure, strict bed rest orders that she'd been following religiously. Her doctor had used words like high risk and complications with increasing frequency. Yet somehow, in the midst of carrying their first child, Victoria had never felt more alone. Nathan had been absent. Not physically, not entirely. He came home most nights, eventually. He attended the important doctor's appointments, the ones where ultrasound photos would be taken and shared on social media. But he was gone in every way that mattered. His mind was always elsewhere, his phone constantly buzzing with urgent messages, his laptop open at the breakfast table during dinner, even in bed. Building the future, he'd say when she'd gently complain. "This is all for our family, Vic. For our daughter. They were having a girl." Victoria had wanted to name her Sophie after her grandmother. Nathan had agreed with the distracted enthusiasm of someone approving a lunch order. Victoria turned from the window and caught her reflection in the antique mirror that hung in the hallway. She still looked like herself, the same sharp cheekbones, the same auburn hair, now swept into a loose chignon. But her eyes told a different story. They held a knowledge she wished she didn't possess. The discovery had been almost mundane in its ordinariness. 3 weeks ago, she'd been organizing Nathan's home office while he was traveling to Berlin for a conference. The cleaning service had been canceled due to her doctor's concerns about chemical exposure, so she'd taken to tidying spaces herself, grateful for something to do beyond staring at pregnancy blogs and nursery paint swatches. She'd found the receipt in the pocket of a blazer he'd worn the previous week. The Gramercy Hotel. Presidential suite. 2 nights. The dates corresponded with a time Nathan had told her he was staying late at the office to prepare for a presentation. The hotel was 12 blocks from their penthouse. Her hands had trembled as she'd picked up the receipt, her heart performing a sickening free-fall in her chest. She'd told herself there could be an explanation. A mistake. Perhaps he'd been hosting clients and needed the discretion of a hotel meeting room. But then she'd found the others. More receipts tucked into different jacket pockets wadded in his gym bag. Restaurants she'd never been to. A jewelry store. But she hadn't received any gifts. And then the phone bill, detailing hundreds of text messages and calls to a single number. A number that corresponded to a name in his contacts, listed simply as CW, Claire Winters. Victoria knew exactly who Claire Winters was. She was Nathan's director of investor relations, a position he'd personally created for her 2 years ago. Claire was 29, whip-smart, with the kind of aggressive ambition that reminded Victoria of Nathan himself when they'd first met at Harvard Business School 15 years ago. She'd seen Claire at company events, always dressed impeccably, always positioned close to Nathan's elbow, laughing at his jokes with a brightness that seemed to suggest she was the only one who truly understood his brilliance. Victoria had even liked her once, had appreciated having another woman in Nathan's testosterone-heavy executive circle. How spectacularly naive that seemed now. The deleted messages had been the final confirmation. Nathan was meticulous about many things, but he'd grown careless with his iPad, the one he used for drafting presentations. He'd left it charging in the kitchen, and Victoria, moving past denial into a cold, crystalline clarity, had opened it. The messages weren't deleted on that device. "I can't stop thinking about Prague," Claire had written. "When can we go back?" "Soon, my love," Nathan had replied. "After the baby comes and things settle. I promise you what we have is real. Everything else is just obligation." Obligation. That's what Victoria had been reduced to. The mother of his child, the heiress whose family name and pharmaceutical fortune had given Ashford Biotech its initial credibility and funding. An obligation. For 2 days after reading those messages, Victoria had been paralyzed by a grief so profound it felt physical. She'd called in sick, claiming pregnancy fatigue, and had stayed in bed, tears soaking into her silk pillowcases. She'd cycled through every emotion: heartbreak, rage, humiliation, and a devastating sense of failure. But on the third day, something had shifted. She'd woken up, felt her daughter kick, a strong, insistent reminder that she wasn't just thinking for herself anymore, and the grief had crystallized into something harder, something unbreakable. She was Victoria Ashford, not Victoria Ashford, wife of Nathan. She was the daughter of Richard Ashford, a man who'd built a pharmaceutical empire from a single patent. She was the granddaughter of Elizabeth Ashford, who'd survived the Depression and turned rationing into a business opportunity. She came from a line of survivors, of builders, of people who didn't shatter when the world pushed back. Nathan had made a critical miscalculation. He'd mistaken her grace for weakness, her quiet support for ignorance, her pregnancy for incapacitation. He'd forgotten, or perhaps never truly understood, that she wasn't just the woman who'd taken his name. She was an Ashford, and Ashfords didn't lose. They regrouped, they strategized, and they conquered. Victoria had begun to plan. The Ashford Innovation Summit was scheduled for next week. It was Nathan's brainchild, an annual event that combined a shareholders' meeting with a tech conference, drawing investors, media, and industry leaders from around the world. This year's summit was particularly crucial. They were announcing a breakthrough in gene therapy that could position Ashford Biotech as a leader in personalized medicine. Nathan had been preparing his keynote address for months. Victoria, as the wife of the CEO and a member of the board of directors, a courtesy position Nathan had suggested to appease her father, was expected to attend. To smile, to network, to be the perfect representation of the stable, family-oriented company image Nathan was cultivating. She had other plans. Victoria had spent the last 2 weeks making careful, strategic moves. First, she'd met with her father at his estate in Connecticut, away from any possibility of Nathan's surveillance. Richard Ashford had listened to everything with a face like carved granite, his anger a cold, controlled fury that Victoria found oddly comforting. "He's made a mistake," her father had said simply, "a very expensive mistake." Together, they'd reviewed the corporate structure. The Ashford Family Trust held 40% of Ashford Biotech's shares. Nathan personally owned 25%. The remaining 35% was distributed among various investors and the executive team. With her father's backing, Victoria controlled the largest single voting bloc. Nathan had been so confident in his position, so assured of her complacency, that he'd never considered this vulnerability. Next, Victoria had quietly met with Walter Chen, the company's chief legal counsel and a man who'd worked with her father for 30 years. She'd laid out the situation with clinical precision, showed him the evidence she'd compiled, and asked for his assessment. "Morally reprehensible," Walter had said, his mouth a thin line. "Legally, you're in a strong position. Fiduciary duty, shareholder value, conflict of interest. If the board believes his personal conduct has compromised the company, they can vote him out. And with your family's voting bloc, we'd have the majority," Victoria had finished. "Mrs. Ashford," Walter had said carefully, "are you certain you want to pursue this? The public scrutiny, the media attention, especially in your condition—" "My condition," Victoria had interrupted, her voice steel wrapped in silk, "is precisely why I'm doing this. My daughter will not grow up thinking this is acceptable. That power excuses betrayal. That women are meant to smile and endure." The final piece of her plan had been the summit itself. She'd contacted Gregory Mills, the event coordinator, someone whose career she'd personally championed when he was just starting out. She'd explained that she wanted to make a special announcement, something personal and touching about family and the company's future. Gregory, grateful and unsuspecting, had readily agreed to add her to the program, right after Nathan's keynote address. Nathan knew none of this. He'd been so consumed with his presentation, with Claire, with managing his double life, that he hadn't noticed his wife's sudden calm. He'd interpreted her serenity as acceptance, her quiet activity as nesting behavior. He had no idea he was walking into an execution. This morning, as Victoria stood in their penthouse, she felt a strange sense of peace. The decision had been made. The pieces were in position. Tonight, she'd pack a bag. Her father's driver would collect her tomorrow morning while Nathan was at his breakfast meeting. By the time Nathan took the stage at the summit in 3 days, she'd be in her childhood bedroom at the Connecticut estate, her lawyers on standby, her father at her side. She heard Nathan's footsteps behind her, his phone already pressed to his ear. "Yes, Claire, I've reviewed the slides. They're perfect. You've outdone yourself. I know. I'll see you at the office." He ended the call and kissed Victoria's cheek, a gesture so routine it was almost robotic. "Morning, darling. How are you feeling? Is Sophie behaving?" Victoria turned to him, summoning the gentle smile she'd perfected over weeks of planning. "We're both fine, Nathan. Actually, I'm feeling better than I have in months." It wasn't a lie. For the first time in weeks, she knew exactly what came next. "That's wonderful," he said, already distracted, checking his messages. "The summit's going to be incredible. Historic, really. I can't wait for you to see it." "Neither can I," Victoria replied, her hand resting on her belly, on the daughter who would never see her mother accept less than she deserved. "I think it's going to be absolutely unforgettable." Nathan smiled, missing entirely the edge in her voice, and headed to his study. Victoria watched him go, then turned back to the window, to the city that was about to witness the unraveling of Nathan Ashford's carefully constructed empire. 3 more days, she thought. Then the world would see what happened when you underestimated an Ashford woman. The unraveling. The Manhattan Convention Center was a cathedral of glass and ambition. 20-foot screens displayed the Ashford Biotech logo, a double helix intertwined with a rising sun, while 2,000 of the world's most influential people filled the auditorium. Venture capitalists sat beside Nobel laureates. Tech journalists rubbed shoulders with pharmaceutical executives. The air hummed with the electric anticipation of announcement and opportunity. Victoria Ashford sat in the front row, a study in serene composure. Her emerald silk dress, custom-tailored to accommodate her pregnancy, caught the stage lights beautifully. Her hair was swept up in an elegant twist, diamond earrings, gifts from her grandmother, glinting at her ears. To anyone watching, she was the picture of a supportive wife, radiant with impending motherhood, proud of her husband's achievements. Only her father, seated beside her, could see the truth. Richard Ashford's hand briefly covered hers, a silent gesture of solidarity. Across the aisle, Victoria spotted Claire Winters, positioned strategically in the VIP section. She wore a stunning navy dress that walked the line between professional and provocative, her dark hair falling in glossy waves. She was staring at the stage with an expression of proprietary pride, as if she'd personally built everything Nathan was about to unveil. In a way, Victoria supposed, she had. Claire had worked on every presentation slide, every investor pitch, every media talking point. She'd been Nathan's shadow, his collaborator, his secret. Looking at her now, Victoria felt no hatred, only a cold, clinical assessment. Claire was a casualty of Nathan's ego, just as Victoria had been. The difference was that Victoria was about to survive the blast. The lights dimmed. A promotional video began, sweeping shots of laboratories, testimonials from patients whose lives had been transformed by Ashford Biotech's treatments, stirring music that built to a crescendo. Then, Nathan's voice, confident and warm, filled the auditorium. "Ladies and gentlemen, what if I told you that we're standing at the threshold of a medical revolution?" He strode onto the stage to thunderous applause, immaculate in a charcoal suit, his smile radiating charisma. He was magnificent, Victoria had to admit. Nathan had always been extraordinary at this, commanding a room, making people believe in his vision, in him. It was why she'd fallen in love with him in the first place, back when that vision had included her as a genuine partner rather than a decorative obligation. 10 years ago, Nathan continued, his voice resonating through the excellent acoustics. My wife Victoria and I founded Ashford Biotech with a simple mission: to make precision medicine accessible to everyone, not just the privileged few. He gestured toward Victoria. The camera swiveled, capturing her composed smile. She inclined her head graciously, playing her part. For now. Today, I'm proud to announce Project Genesis, a gene therapy platform that will revolutionize treatment for over 300 hereditary diseases. We're not just treating symptoms anymore. We're rewriting genetic destinies. The presentation was flawless. Nathan walked the audience through breakthrough after breakthrough, each slide more impressive than the last. Investment analysts were frantically typing notes. Journalists were live tweeting. The stock price ticker in the corner of the screen showed Ashford Biotech climbing steadily upward. Victoria watched it all with detached interest, one hand resting on her belly where her daughter moved restlessly. Soon, sweetheart, she thought. Soon you'll understand that your mother didn't just give you life, she gave you dignity. Nathan's keynote concluded with a soaring call to action about building futures together with integrity as our foundation. The irony was so thick Victoria could taste it. The applause was deafening. Nathan stood at center stage basking in it, his smile triumphant. Then Gregory Mills, the event coordinator, stepped forward with a microphone. Thank you, Nathan, for that inspiring vision. Before we break for the reception, we have a special surprise. Someone who's been instrumental in Ashford Biotech's journey wanted to share a few words. Please welcome to the stage Victoria Ashford. Victoria saw Nathan's smile freeze, then crack. Confusion flooded his features as he turned toward Gregory, mouthing something. What? This wasn't. But the spotlights were already swinging toward Victoria, and the audience was applauding, delighted by this unexpected addition. She rose with practiced grace, feeling her father's brief squeeze of encouragement on her arm. The walk to the stage felt both endless and instantaneous. She was aware of everything. The whisper of her silk dress, the weight of her daughter, the 2,000 pairs of eyes tracking her movement. Claire Winters had gone pale, a crease of worry forming between her perfectly shaped eyebrows. Nathan met her at the stairs, his hand reflexively reaching to help her up. His touch was rigid with tension. "Vic, what are you doing?" he hissed under his breath, his smile never wavering. "This wasn't in the program." "I know," she said softly, sweetly, for his ears alone. "Surprise, darling." She stepped past him and took position at the podium. The microphone hummed to life under her touch. The massive screens behind her now displayed a single image, the Ashford family crest, with its Latin motto, Veritas Vincit. Truth conquers. "Thank you all for that warm welcome," Victoria began, her voice clear and controlled. "I apologize for the surprise, but there are some things that can't be scheduled. Some truths that choose their own moment." She could feel Nathan behind her, radiating panic, but he was trapped by the audience's attention. To interrupt her now would look monstrous. "My husband just spoke beautifully about building futures with integrity, about rewriting destinies, about partnerships." Victoria paused, letting the words settle. "These are concepts I've been thinking about quite deeply in recent weeks, as I prepare to bring new life into this world." Sympathetic murmurs rippled through the crowd. Pamela Cross, the society columnist from the Times, was leaning forward in her seat, sensing something beneath the surface. "Ashford Biotech exists because of a partnership," Victoria continued. 15 years ago, Nathan and I met at Harvard. We fell in love. We built dreams together. When he wanted to start this company, my family's pharmaceutical empire provided the seed funding, $40 million from the Ashford Trust. My father's reputation opened doors that would have remained closed to a startup. The Ashford name became synonymous with this company's credibility. She smiled, and it was sharp enough to cut glass. A true partnership. Or so I believed. Nathan stepped forward, his hand outstretched. "Victoria, perhaps we should—" "I'm not finished," she said, not even looking at him. Her voice carried such absolute authority that he actually stepped back. In medicine, we talk about genetic mutations, unexpected changes in the code that can be benign or catastrophic. Marriages, too, can experience mutations. Sometimes what you think is healthy tissue reveals itself to be malignant. The audience was utterly silent now. Even the journalists had stopped typing, transfixed. 3 weeks ago, I discovered that my husband has been conducting a separate trial, an experiment in compartmentalization. He's been building a different future with a different partner, while I've been home following doctor's orders. Managing the complications of a high-risk pregnancy with our daughter, Nathan has been exploring alternative arrangements. A collective gasp went through the auditorium. Cameras were swinging wildly between Victoria and Nathan. Claire Winters looked like she might faint. "Now, I'm not here to air personal grievances," Victoria said, her voice remaining measured, almost clinical. "That would be beneath us both. But I am here to discuss what this means for Ashford Biotech. Because you, the investors, the shareholders, the public, deserve to know when leadership has compromised the company's values." Behind her, the screens changed. Projected now were text messages, the intimate details carefully redacted, but the damning nature crystal clear. "Soon, my love. What we have is real, after things settle. And most devastatingly, she's just an obligation." The audience erupted in chaos. Shouted questions, the flash of cameras. Nathan's face had drained of all color. He looked to Claire, who was surrounded by pointing fingers and urgent whispers. Victoria's voice cut through it all. "The Ashford Family Trust controls 40% of this company's shares. My father and I have spent the past week in consultation with our legal counsel and the board of directors. We believe that when leadership engages in conduct that contradicts our core values, integrity, transparency, partnership, it's our fiduciary duty to act." Richard Ashford stood, his presence commanding immediate attention. Other board members were rising too, their faces grim with purpose. "Effective immediately," Victoria announced. "I am exercising my rights as the majority shareholder to call for a vote of no confidence in Nathan Ashford's leadership as CEO." The auditorium exploded. Reporters were sprinting toward exits, desperate to file their stories. The stock ticker in the corner began to plummet, numbers bleeding red. Investors were on their phones, voices overlapping in panic and fury. Nathan finally found his voice. "This is insane!" "Victoria, you don't have the authority." "I have every authority," she said, turning to face him directly for the first time. "The Ashford Trust isn't yours, Nathan." "It never was. You were so confident that my quiet support meant weak compliance. You forgot that I'm not just your wife. I'm an Ashford, and we protect what's ours." She gestured to the screens where a new image appeared. Official documentation, signed by board members. 7 of the 12 board members have agreed to support my motion. That's a majority, Nathan. As of this moment, you are relieved of your duties as CEO. My father will serve as interim chief executive while I assume the role of chairwoman. "You're 8 months pregnant," Nathan shouted, his composure completely shattered. "You can't run a company in your condition." Victoria's laugh was cold and cutting. "My condition hasn't prevented me from uncovering your affair, documenting your breaches of fiduciary duty, securing board support, and orchestrating this transition. I think I'll manage." She turned back to the audience, her voice rising above the chaos. "To our investors and partners, Ashford Biotech's mission remains unchanged. Project Genesis will proceed on schedule. The difference is that this company will now be led by people who actually believe in integrity, not just as a marketing talking point." Security was moving toward the stage now, not the convention center's security, but men in dark suits with earpieces that Victoria recognized as her father's personal detail. "Ms. Winters," Victoria said, her gaze finding Claire in the audience, "your employment is terminated effective immediately. You'll be escorted from the building. All company property, including the corporate apartment where I understand you've been staying, will need to be vacated by end of business tomorrow." Claire stood on shaking legs, her face a portrait of devastation. She looked at Nathan, perhaps hoping for some defense, some rescue. But Nathan was staring at Victoria with an expression of absolute horror, finally understanding the magnitude of what had just happened. "Ladies and gentlemen," Victoria concluded, "I apologize for the disruption. However, I believe you'll find that Ashford Biotech is now better positioned than ever. We'll be holding a proper shareholder meeting next week. In the meantime, please enjoy the reception. My father and our executive team will be available to address any concerns." She stepped away from the podium. Her father was there immediately, his arm around her shoulders, guiding her toward the private exit. Behind them, the auditorium had descended into absolute pandemonium. Reporters were shouting questions. Nathan was being surrounded by board members whose expressions ranged from angry to pitying. Claire was being escorted out by security, her career imploding in real time. As Victoria reached the exit, she felt a sudden sharp pain in her abdomen. She gasped, her hand flying to her belly. "Victoria?" Her father's voice was sharp with concern. "I'm all right," she said, though another contraction proved otherwise. "Actually, I think Sophie has chosen her timing as dramatically as her mother." Richard Ashford's eyes widened. "We're getting you to the hospital, now." "Good," Victoria said, managing a smile even as another wave of pain hit. "I'd like to have my daughter on my own terms, too, away from all of this." As her father's security team rushed her toward the waiting car, Victoria took one last look back at the convention center. Through the glass walls, she could see the chaos still unfolding, Nathan's perfect world disintegrating in real time. She'd told him the summit would be unforgettable. She'd kept that promise, at least. The car pulled away, sirens wailing, carrying Victoria toward the hospital and toward a future she would build entirely on her own terms. Behind her, the media firestorm was just beginning. Ahead of her, everything was uncertain. But for the first time in months, Victoria felt something she'd almost forgotten: hope.